Okay, the lesson today is for entity framework. We have a question. Today lecture about Microsoft Entity Framework. Okay, let's start. First one, from the beginning week until now, you had a lot of time to practice with form control throughout two projects, a calculator and task management. Now is a theory with make relationship between the object. So is the object to database. Okay, let's continue. From the object, for example, is a class, user, and task. We map directly to SQL to database, for example, SQL Server or SQL. Like we have a lot of. So how handle this mapping? We will use entity framework. It's one of open source ORM object related mapping, object relationship, object relationship, mapping. A framework for .NET application. It has the diagram like this. From the top, the bottom is database, and we use entity framework to connect with database throughout the mapping. And call is a data layer, and the middle is a business layer, or another name is controller. And the top one is the UI or user interface. From now, we will divide our program in three layers or three tiers. Layers is better name. It had three layers. The first layer, the two layer, and the third. On the form, it depends on the UI layer. Processing task is depend on business layer or controller, and finally is for model or class, object that's related to database. It depends on the last layer. So now when you write a code on C# or .NET framework, you must divide your program into three layers like this. Okay, entity framework has some very useful and important features. First, it has cross-platform. It means that it not only runs on Windows, but also can run on Unix like Ubuntu Mac OS, and also can run on the mobile platform, so it cross platform. It has modeling. We can model the database by a class relationship, querying. We can access the database, chain tracking, saving the data, concurrencies with the object, and the database. In the bank application, we can have very good transactions management to the data, and caching, just store information on the middle. It has a lot of building conventions and configuration for config the connection string, for example. And finally, we have feature is migration from one application. For example, it's you write your code on your own computer and can migration to another computer. For example, Ubuntu or Mac OS. So it has a lot of good features with Entity Framework. Now we use this framework to develop our project. Here is a Entity Framework basic workflows. It has 4 main tasks. The first one, you must define your model. This is including classes, context classes, and some configuration. For example, in our task program, task management, we have is a user task. Context class is for SQL 2005 connection configuration. For example, how many hours we will notice the message. Another is some configuration, and after that we create some example data. Is field, for example, name, task. When it has the data, we can use context. Context is related to database, and add context to framework. From framework we can save change to save data to database. It save directly to database. This is for the first. The second, when we have the form, we can read the data from database, use a link queue to entity query. It gets data from this, and after we retrieve data from database, we can edit or delete data from some function. For example, it's update, remove. Update is a edit, and remove is a delete. After update remove, we say it in context, and it's directly use API to access to data. From this diagram workflow, we can see it's very good, transparent with database sync on off the main task with database in this green regions is handled by entity framework. We don't care about the database. Our task just make the interface, make some business, and up the remain of the task for we handle is we delegate it for entity framework. So it's very good framework for the coding with a little information about the database. This like a black box. Okay, how entity framework works? It works based on the API. As you can see, all of it is API. It has some API for map from classes to database schema. We have class, for example, user class, and we have some, for example, username. But on the database, it will present a table or schema, table user, and it has one ID is the username, and it's a key. Second is translate link queue to entity query to SQL and execute it. And track change, how we change on entity and it's directly update to database and save to database. Entity data model, as I explained before, for example, I have class in student, we have student ID, first name, last name, it is property of students, and it's mapping by entity data model or ADM. It maps directly to the table in database with this is primary key, not known, first name, last name. And to mapping, the middleware here is a entity framework API. For it has three concepts for ADM, entity data model. It has conceptual model, mapping, and storage model. Conceptual model is related to class, mapping is the bitching, and storage model is the database, a table in data. So this we don't care about it. We have Microsoft framework, they care for us. Okay, as I explained before, entity data model or ADM had three main concepts: a conceptual model, storage model, and mapping. For querying, we can query the dataset from the context image database. Connection. And we can use the link queue. Link queue, it looks like the SQL SQL query. It has also selected as from as student and where as first name a view. After to list of students is a link queue. I have used link queue for our practice project, such as link queue to list. This link queue command will translate to link queue to entities and query SQL. From this, it will translate into the query. Thus, select some objects from student table, TB table dot student, where student dot first name equal name. And ADM is the entity data model will retrieve the SQL queries and get back is the object to this student. So this student become a list of student. This process to query the data in database. And for saving, it just here in the context, it keep track what change in the dataset, and after we can the command save change. It will track what change in the database, entity database, by on the ADM model, and build some insert, update, or delete command to the database. The entity framework architecture, we have some bodies is a ADM, entity data model, has 3 parts: conceptual model, mapping, and storage model. The bottom is a database, upper is the IDEO.NET data provider. Before entity frameworks, of programmers work with IDEO.NET, but now we have entity framework, so we can work upper layer, entity data provider. And from this provider, we have the object service, and it's going to a link queue to entity or entity SQL, and this will push data on ADM model. The context class in entity framework is described as this example. We have the data entity, and we have class school context that inherited from the DB context. DB context is the base class. And in this, it is the table. Here table, and this is table. One of this is one table in database. For table example is a student, a table of student. A grade, a table of grade, and student accuracy is table of student accuracy. And all of this entity with the implement of DB sets. The entity in EF framework has a class that maps to a database table, as I explained. For example, student will map into table DBO student. Here is the SQL to management. And grade class grade is also mapping into grade. It has primary key grade ID map in this primary key, student ID in this student ID, and foreign key, for example, is one student has one grade, and one grade can have a lot of students. So here's the one too many. It's the because grade and student is a one and many. So to present this relationship, we have in class student we have one object is grade, and in class grade we have I collection of student. Entity, we have different type of entity. Here is two types. The BLCL entity or plain OCIL object. Second is the dynamic process entity or BLCL process. It's a runtime process class with warping this entity. We can transfer BLCL to dynamic process entity if we can handle this property. First, it is public access. The class not be sealed and not inheriting in VB. Not be abstract, and its navigation properties must declare as a public or virtual, and its collection must be I collection. A collection we can list as our practice, but just only I collection can change to dynamic process entity. And the property process creation enable must not be false, or in another word, it is true. And here default in the context class. The entity style in entity framework. So each entity have 5 states. You can add this, modify, delete, unchained, and detect. We have 5 properties of entity, and these states are managed by DB context. For example, this entity has state add this entity has state modify, this entity has state deleted, and final this entity is unchained. And when we call save change to the database, it will handle 3 commands: is the insert, update, or delete to the database. This managed by entity framework, and this handled by entity data model ADM. To develop approaches with entity framework, we had 3 approaches. First one is a database first, second one is a code first, and third is a model first. It means that we have problem or line, we have the requirement. So how can we build our project? It has 3 approaches: database first, code first and model first. As you see, with this the name, we can predict how it's approached. The first one is a database first. Database first, it means that we have database. We have in this case, since we have database, we will transfer database into entity framework and transfer to contact and entity class. And beyond this, we will develop UI and BI. BI là business model interface. So it starts by database, transfer to entity frameworks, contact class, and finally and UI interface. In another way, code first approaches in reverse. We had database at the end. We only had the domain classes. It comes from the requirement and UI. From requirements, we modeling some domain classes and some rule constants. And based on this, we transfer it into entity framework. And from entity framework, we use ADM, entity data model, to map into the database with the table. These two approaches is two sides of approach, totally different. The order, just change the order of where is the database and where is code. And finally, in the model first approaches, in this kind of approach, it's a little bit different because we design a database model first. On Visual Designer, it has a model designer. This database is just on the code database. And when have database, we use entity framework to convert into context and entity classes. Now here is look like code first, but it starts from the simulate database, and finally we update it into the real database. Here are three approaches for develop application with entity framework. Here, how we can choose the development approach. First, we consider we already have existing domain classes. If yes, we go to code first. If no, we answer next question. Is this existing database? If yes, we go to database first approach. If no, we must go into Visual Designer or DB modeling first, and it has a model first. If now we also don't have this control, we come back into this set. Do you want to design a database first? If yes, we go to the database first. If no, we come back to code first. And after that, we write code. This is the end of process. Here I present how we can choose the development approaches. Now we have example. It is our task management. So our task management, what is the approach we will use? I have about 15 minutes for you to answer this. Think about these questions and also take a rest time. We'll come back at 14. We will come back after 15 minutes. Okay, I hope that you know what's approach that's appropriate for our task management. Actually, it comes from the code first, or even though model first is okay. So we can use code or model first approach. From the database first approach, it only works on the case that we have the database, but now we don't have database, so from remain code and model first is good for our program. Next, I would talk about the basic terms in entity framework. It had two models: connected scenario and disconnected scenario. In the case of connected scenario, it works for Windows app. Since it keeps the connection to database on the time, this connection it will keep the entity state unchanged, update, add, delete, and one is the unstack. So in connected scenarios, it keeps on keeps the connection to database and write or read via entity framework context. Cool operation is create, update, and delete. So this approach has some advantage. But first, it's very fast. It keeps the connection with database, and it keeps track of entities and automatically sets an appropriate state. But it has also some disadvantages. First, it's the connection with database on stay open, so it makes the stress for database. And what happens if there's some error in this the database is broken? It's not good. And since it keeps track on entity, it uses a lot of resources. On another hand, disconnected scenario has some advantage. It uses less resources since the connection is disconnected. It based on two contexts. It's good for the web application or distributed. It don't have no open connection. It's just connection when we call the entity data model operation mapping. So, but it also has two disadvantages. First, we must set appropriate state to each entity before saving. Since they don't keep the connection, they must know what is the state. And second, it's often performance is slower with a connected approach. So next, I will introduce you the entity framework course. Previous year entity EF6 framework. This framework was only for Windows. And nowadays, almost companies they change to entity framework called Sync. As you see in this, it has a lot of applications from ASP.NET for web, API, console, .NET framework, application, console, WinForm, WPF, ASP.NET. It can work with a lot of operating system, for example, Windows, Mac, Linux, or Windows or mobile. It has a lot of application, and the core anti-framework core is this. It's different between entity framework 6 with entity framework core. In your project, you can choose one of them, but I suggest you entity framework core because nowadays a lot of companies they use this framework. In entity framework core development, they just have only two approaches. First is database first, second is code first. They don't have model first. Since it don't have the model designer, so it's removed just two of them. And here I attach example link for difference between entity framework course and entity framework 6. You can see on this website. Okay, in next I will introduce how to install entity framework course. It's based on the newest package from the tool and package management. You can search from the internet and look at it. First one is the SQL server connection to database, or you can install it from the command line of this package. We also need to install entity framework called tools. It's installed throughout the VMC browser this for command line interface with this package. And after installing it, we change its property to use this in .NET Framework is in this setting in project description is CSVC. Okay, now this is theory for our lecture today. The practice is you compare between all of two frameworks on this link and instance entity framework code to your Visual Studio. And after it's finished install, you must discuss with your friends about the project, final project. what tasks you will do in this final project. In this week, we don't have the practice project. You must finish the previous practice for MDI form and add tasks with user.